And we have a new guest. Great. Hello. Okay. So here we go. So I did this special presentation for you this evening because wherever I go, I like to find somebody who is well known in the world of art or literature from your area. So naturally, it's Gilbert Stuart. So I am not an expert on Gilbert Stuart, but I certainly I've did a little bit of reading about him, and I certainly have appreciated his work in my research of Christmas and art. So this is a presentation I haven't given before. I like to change it up so that it's interesting for you and for me. So if you have questions at the end, I'm very happy to answer them. George Washington married Martha on Twelfth Night of 1759. And the Washingtons celebrated Twelfth Night throughout their marriage as their anniversary. George Washington was well known for having a big silver goblet of eggnog, well spiked, and Martha made a very famous cake called the white cake, which was a fruit cake covered in white icing. The way that they would have celebrated this time, the 12th night, would have been very, very different than our Christmases. It would have involved feasting and drinking and fox hunting and partying and dancing, and some religious experiences, but very much sort of more 12th night experience. The earliest reference that we have for Santa Claus, spelled S-T-A Claus, comes from a newspaper in 1773, December the 20th. The New York Gazette, alongside the first reports of the destruction of the tea in Boston Harbor, printed Hugh Gain, read an article about this event. It was held on December the 13th in the anniversary of St. Nicholas, otherwise called Santa Claus, celebrated at Proston Hall at Mr. Waldron's, where a great number of the sons of that ancient city celebrated the day with great joy and festivity. What's interesting is the Moore family, Clement Clarke Moore, who wrote Twas The Night for Christmas, his family are from here in the early 1630s, 1640. So it's possible the Moors back even then were celebrating St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas was celebrated all the way through. He's from the 3rd century of the Roman Empire. He's the saint who came to rescue 3 women from being sold into slavery by throwing gold through a window. And the father stayed up to see who was doing this, and the second night he approaches St. Nicholas and says, "Thank you so much." He says, "No, this is anonymous. I don't want thanks. I'm just doing this to help you." That's the legend of Santa Claus. It comes through all these centuries and all these cultures. So I find that really interesting. They've celebrated St. Nicholas, this great saint, all through the ages, and they celebrate the anniversary of his death, not his birth. The Romans celebrated death dates, not birth dates. So this is usually December the 6th. For some reason, they were doing it on the 13th. I'm not sure what that's all about, but this is very early Santa Claus appearing, or Santa Claus appearing in America. George Washington, as you know, this Gilbert Stuart painting from 1797 was commissioned by William Constable. Constable was the aide-de-camp de Lafayette, and he did this painting. He asked for Gilbert Stuart to do this as a present for Alexander Hamilton. And it's a fun little story here that ties this all into Christmas. So when you're a historian, it's really fun to get to know the people that you're researching as well as you can. And I've done a great deal of work on William Constable and all the people he was associated with. And what's interesting about William Constable is that he was a very colorful individual, very well-to-do, owned enormous swaths of property in America after coming from Ireland. And he is related to the Clement Clarke Moores through his children marrying into the Moore family. The Constable family believed very strongly that 'Twas the Night Before Christmas was written at their home in Constableville, New York. They have a big sign outside the building that says, "The home of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And the circuit, the house is 1819 Federalist style, but there's absolutely no evidence of that. There are some letters between Constable's daughter-in-law, Mary Moore Constable, and the Moore family, but it's all conjecture. But it's very dreamy. And I've been there, and I really enjoy walking into this house. And there's pieces from Lafayette in this house, porcelain and things, because William Constable was his aide-de-camp. But it's it's fanciful, but it's dreamy because it's the right era. So when you're a historian, it's nice to walk into a room like this and think, well, maybe Moore was here, maybe. The shutters, the chimney, everything, but it's conjecture. Tying this in, Benjamin Moore was Clement Clarke Moore's father. He was the Bishop of New York, and this is the home in Manhattan where I believe the poem was written. So not Constable Hall up in upstate New York, in Manhattan. The Moores owned all of Chelsea. That's why they're so wealthy today. The family still continues to be very wealthy. They owned all of Chelsea, and they ended up, through Clement Clarke Moore, subdividing it into lots, into homes. And Clement Clarke Moore was a builder, so he actually got involved in building. So that's where the real wealth came from. That and also the orchards. This property was visited by George Washington, and when Molly Stillwell, Clement Clarke's grandmother, was here, George Washington's troops were billeted there, and they were cutting down her cherry trees and apple trees to make wood for their fires, and she got quite annoyed. And so she beckoned George Washington to come to the house and, gallop down his horse and tell him to get them to knock it off. So fun things like that. And but what's really interesting is that, tying this into history, we have Benjamin Moore, the father of Clement Clarke Moore, attend the duel of Hamilton. When Hamilton is shot, Clement Clarke Moore's father, the Bishop of New York, they ride down to the house and they get him and they say, "You must come." And he gives last rites to Alexander Hamilton. He also, at this point, writes in his diary that it was a duel. Had he not done that, because it was illegal to duel at this time, it would have been written off as a gun accident, and we wouldn't know it was a duel. So, interesting little bits of history. So we sort of tied. Pardon me?
Who said it was
Benjamin Moore. Clement Clarke Moore's father, yes. And so we sort of, this little series of slides I presented, we've got Gilbert Stuart with Constable, William Constable with Hamilton, with George Washington. So it's kind of fun to sort of see the connections and really get into the detail when you're a historian of these people. This, you might wonder, what on earth does Benedict Arnold have to do with Christmas and 'Twas the Night for Christmas? But there's a really fascinating thing I found. Clement Clarke Moore's godfather was an individual who was a British spy. He was an American, but he was a British spy. And he ends up decoding all the correspondence between Andre, the British officer, and Benedict Arnold during the defection affair. And he goes on his free way doing all of this spy work because George Washington, I found this in the Smithsonian, this is a letter from George Washington saying, oh no, Odell can just go wherever he wants because he, with no fear of being withheld or any kind of disturbing him for his life, because George Washington did not know he was a spy. And so this man carried this paper around with him and traveled about. He ends up fleeing after the American Revolution. He ends up fleeing to England and going into Canada on a government commission. But this was his godfather, and he was very involved in the Benedict Arnold affair. So now that's sort of the end of the Gilbert Stuart connection. I think that was hope that was enjoyable. I had fun putting that together. Washington Irving, the great writer, was an amazing individual. Of all the people I researched in 200 years of Christmas in America, Washington Irving would be the one person I would choose if someone said, who would you like to have dinner with? Washington Irving was incredibly funny, very well read, very educated, very well connected, and a very good writer. I just finished reading his biography of George Washington. If you haven't read it, I'd highly recommend it for this year going forward on 250. It's really, really good. And it was his favorite work, and he finished it just before he died. So Washington Irving, his museum's in Sunnyside and Tarrytown in New York, and he wrote a great deal about Christmas. Washington Irving wrote a book, Knickerbocker, and in Knickerbocker, he has St. Nicholas flying around the skies of Manhattan in a wagon and doing all kinds of other things. It was really the beginning of Christmas with Santa Claus in America. What he did as well was he was involved in the Knickerbocker group of writers, and they were interested in addressing the issue of violence in New York during Christmas. At this time, you would have celebrations of people who would come to your door and they'd be dressed in furs and relatively scary, drunk, and they wouldn't just ask for a donation. They would come in and they would take you hostage until they were done. And it was very scary to people like this who wanted to sort of try and solve the problem of the rowdy Christmas. Because Christmas was 12th night, it was misrule, it was partying in the streets, guns, drinking, debauchery, and it was out of control. So Washington Irving comes along, and he is not political, but he does romanticize history for a reason. He's trying to calm down Christmas. And he tries to, from Knickerbocker, he moves on to Old Christmas, on all those stories, and they're wonderful, but they're very much sort of a romanticized version of what an old English Christmas would look like. Right? There's squires, there's pigs, boars' heads, there's all kinds of things that really maybe didn't happen to the level that he has them happening. But he was trying to romanticize Christmas and bring it indoors. So there were other people involved in this. There was a man named John Petard, very interesting biography if you have time to look him up. Fascinating man, what he accomplished in his life. He wanted St. Nicholas to be the patron saint of America. That was his mission. Because he had been he and his daughter had had one of these encounters with people coming to their home. So he was really trying to solve this issue by trying to create a domestic inside Christmas. But he doesn't succeed. What he does succeed in doing is St. Nicholas becoming the patron saint of Manhattan. And these men start a St. Nicholas Society, and they meet for dinners and things like that. Bishop Benjamin Moore is one of the members. They're members, artists, writers. So Moore's not here in this one. That's Washington Irving that's Washington Irving. If you haven't read Washington Irving, or you haven't for a while, his early work is hilarious, Salcamonde. It's laugh out loud funny. The way he describes the mayor's wife is hysterically funny at her Christmas party. It's very funny stuff. He's wonderful, truly great. And again, this year of celebrating America. I think it's a great year to read Washington Irving. Or go to Terrytown and see his wonderful home. Yeah. It's great. Yeah. I mean, we think of him from Rip Van Winkle and Sleepy Hollow, but it's Christmas stuff. It's really great. This is a picture from Knickerbocker. This is his version of St. Nicholas, little guy, little character over there with the pipe, done by F.O.C. Darley. F.O.C. Darley was the father of American illustration. He was famous. He was known by everyone. He did Dickens, Poe, everybody went to Darley. He lived in Delaware to have them illustrate their work. He was extremely successful and pretty well forgotten today, which is really sad. And his work is very cheap. You can get original Darleys for not that much money, like thousands, not hundreds of thousands. And yeah, really, really terrific artist. Both. Yeah, he illustrated everybody. So now we come to James Fenimore Cooper. Some people think that Santa Claus comes from Twas the Night Before Christmas. No, Saint Nick is in Twas the Night Before Christmas. He's called Saint Nick, a jolly old elf. The first time that we ever have Santa Claus is in The Pioneers by James Fenimore Cooper. James Fenimore Cooper wrote The Pioneers in 1821, published it in 1822, and in there's a scene where the judge is driving home on a sleigh, and he turns to his driver and says, "We need to get home for Christmas Eve because we have to be there in time for Santa Claus." First time in the world anybody ever wrote in literature Santa Claus spelled S-A-N-T-A-C-L-A-U-S. James Fenimore Cooper. So, yes, and his daughter, Susan Fenimore Cooper, she writes one of the first naturalist writers in America. She writes wonderful stories about, it's a diary. It's really great to read too. Same year, we have this children's friend book appear. This was just discovered not that long ago, like I'm going to say in the last 30 years, this book. And it's before Twas, because Twas is 1822, 1823. This comes along with this reindeer. And this is a bishop character of St. Nick bringing books. And he has a birchen rod, and he has rewards. So he's still into the naughty or nice, or punishment for naughty children. It's a book. It's a book. That's an illustration from the book. It was found in someone's collection not very long ago. Yeah. Yeah. Now we come to Clement Clarke Moore. I've spent a great deal of time with Clement Clarke Moore. I've read his will. I've read his diaries. I've read everything that one could possibly find on Clement Clarke Moore. And he was a lovely individual from everything I've read. His students adored him, his grandchildren, his children. He was gentle and kind, extremely well educated. He was the valedictorian of his class of 18 at Columbia. He had 18 graduating students in his year. And he was trained in theology, but he taught at the General Theological Seminary in Manhattan. He taught Oriental Studies. He wrote the first Hebrew lexicon in America. He was, I think he had played 5 instruments. Just so educated. He was self-educated, or his father educated him for the early years, but then he went to Columbia. So, yeah, this is the poet of Christmas Eve. There's been some controversy that he didn't write it. That's just, again, there's no factual basis to that. He wrote the poem. He said he wrote it. He signed 5 copies of it, and he put it in his book of poetry. So that's good enough for me, given the fact that there's no evidence of anybody else. The Livingston's argument is hollow. There's nothing there to it. No, he didn't want to be known as the person who did a children's poem. He was a serious scholar. He wanted to be known for other things. That's really what it was about. His mother and his daughter sort of persuaded him to put it in the book of poetry, and his wife. But this is in Newport. Right now, this is in the Colonial House because they're renovating, and I saw it today, and it's right there. This is probably the desk. I'm going to tell you a little story. It's 1822, and Clement Clarke Moore is in his kitchen with his wife in their home in Chelsea, and she's Eliza, Catherine Elizabeth Taylor Moore, says, "I'm making charity baskets, and I'm short a turkey. So could you please hop in your sleigh and go down to Greenwich Village and get me another turkey for the charity basket?" So Clement says, sure. So he gets in his sleigh with his driver and his horses, and off they go, and they get the turkey, and it's snowing, and it's a magical night, and he dreams up this poem, and then he comes in the house, and he gives her the turkey, and he runs upstairs to that desk, and he writes it out, and then he comes down, and he presents it to his family, and that's all conjecture. The only thing that we know factually is correct of that story is it was snowing, because we have weather reports. The rest of it is myth, right? We have no idea, because he didn't start writing his diary until 5 years before he died in his 80s. So there's no record of this. And he doesn't start writing it out in longhand or anywhere until the 1850s. So it all sort of comes through bits and pieces. That's why it's been sort of hijacked by people saying he didn't actually write it. But the other really interesting thing is there's 4 desks in 4 museums in this country that all have plaques saying this is the desk that Clement Clarke Moore wrote the poem on. So if you go to the New York Historical Society, there's a desk. It says the desk. You go here, desk, and then there's one in Pennsylvania, and there's one in a private collection. So, oh no, yeah, it's private. Well, I pulled his will. I paid $80 to pull his will, and I pulled the codicils, and I read everything. And there's mentions of desks and furniture, but they all went to his son, Benjamin Moore. They don't go to anybody else. So it's kind of odd what happened here. We don't really know. But in all likelihood, he wrote the poem on that when he was retired, writing out the longhand. Likely at least one poem was drafted on that desk. But yes, very, yes. So back to F.O.C. Darley. Darley, right? This is 1842. This is the one that Theodore Roosevelt reads when he's 4. This is this style of work. It's just wonderful. This edition's around $1,000 to buy this edition. They're quite rare. There's about 2,000 editions in print. The William and Mary University, the Swen Library has about 1,200. There's a man in Oklahoma that has about 1,500. I've seen his collection. Um, but yeah, done by every major person, really. So, leaving Twas, I wanted to mention Harriet Beecher Stowe because I'm a really big fan of Harriet Beecher Stowe's writing. And I think that when you're looking for things to read at Christmas and you haven't read this recently, you might want to look it up. It's The First Christmas of New England, written in 1875. It's a wonderful short story about the Mayflower, about coming into the port, the bay. It's wonderful. It's kind of writing where you sort of stop and have to sort of, you can you can just feel it and smell it, and it's so well done. But what's really interesting about this story is that she reminds us that the people on the Mayflower, the Puritans, were educated. They came from the world of Shakespeare. They chose a different world. They wanted to have a new world, but they come from this background. They also come from a background of they're very educated, but they also believe that everyone should read because you need to read the scriptures. And so they believed that women, boys and girls, men and women, everybody should read. And so they came into America with some very sort of hard ideas about Christmas celebrations and debauchery and all the things and theater and everything else. They actually outlawed Christmas cookies at one point. They did all these things. But what they did do was they planted the soil for a very rich literary, growth in American literature. So they had men and women. And so what I'm trying to say, I think, is that when I did my research, I was astounded at the number of women that were in the arts. Because we have this sort of thought that women weren't educated, they didn't have access to education, but not really the case. There were early seminaries for women that come along, 1820 kind of thing, but they were taught to read. And so the first two published writers from America were women. I think that's really great. And also in the arts, it was acceptable to be an artist. So that's kind of fun. So as I mentioned, Shakespeare, that's the world they left behind, but they brought parts of it with them. This is fun. Hamlet is the only Shakespearean play set at Christmas time. It's set at Christmas tide, and we know that because it mentions it, but it also says there can't be evil spirits or ghosts around because it's such a hollow time. They don't come out now, right? And then they struggle with that. But what's really interesting is that in this Act 1, Scene 1 of Hamlet, you have the two guards, Bernardo and Francisco, and they're talking about the evening. And then down here it says, Bernardo goes, "Have you had a quiet guard? Not a mouse stirring," which is "'Twas the Night before Christmas," right? So it's really fun to sort of get into the mind of Clement, or Clement Clarke Moore sometimes, and go, "Oh, he's pinched that from Hamlet," kind of fun. So the poem has been, as I said, it was written in 1822. We think on that evening in the Chelsea home of Clement Clarke Moore for his family, for his children, and published the following year in the Troy Sentinel. It's been read by the First Lady of the United States every single year since 1953 with Bess Truman. And I hope it continues for a very long time. I was very involved in the bicentennial of the poem. I nominated Clement Clarke Moore into the New York State Hall of Fame and got Mayor Adams to declare it Clement Clarke Moore Day. And I also have a letter from Joe Biden on my desk thanking me for helping with the White House with their celebration of Twas. So it was a really big year in 2022 and 2023 for me. And I truly think the poem will live on for generations because it is not only wonderful, it is often read to a young child when they're this magical time of the year by someone that they know well and love. And it's all sort of caught up in all the nostalgia of Christmas, and then they want to read it to their children and their grandchildren. So I think it has a long history. I think it'll keep going. So going back, when I do my work, I like to buy old newspapers and magazines and old books. You find things in them that you are really surprised to find. And this one I found, this is from the New York Mirror. This is the very first Santa Claus ever going down a chimney that we have. And it's really fascinating to find out that this was for a toy company. So it's 1841. 1841, we were using Santa to advertise for toys. So it's not, you can't blame Coca-Cola, okay? It's always been, because he's such a popular character, that he's always been used to sell products, right? So I think that's really fun. Moving ahead to 1870s, this is Louis Prang. He comes in from Germany. He revolutionizes art printing in America. He's huge. Christmas cards, posters. He makes it available so you can now have reproductions of, masterpieces in your living rooms, posters. This is all Louis Prang. Very, very important artist and producer. Then you have Harper's, of course, comes along. This is from the 1880s, Thomas Nast. This is considered the portrait of Santa Claus. It's by Nast. It's very, very famous. It was very, very big in the 1980s. I think they had shower curtains. It was on everything. And Harper's is really interesting because Harper comes along, and they're very important during the Civil War. But after the Civil War, they really take off because you have trains and distribution. You have a whole new way of producing things with printing presses and color and things come in. And so Thomas Nast is there right at the beginning. He's there in 1863 with Harper's during the Civil War, but then he takes off in the 80s with this, in the 1880s. And Thomas Nast really dominates what we think of Santa Claus and Christmas in a way for decades. And yeah, I'm sure you've all seen that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's another famous artist, also associated with Harper's. This is Winslow Homer. I don't know where he was that evening, what he was thinking of the short skirt on Santa, but hey, it's Winslow Homer. Very end, right? Isn't that fun? I love this. I think it's just great. Winslow Homer. Look at the tree, right? It's just great. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. A cover. This is another Winslow Homer, right? Super talented. Again, Harper's, right? Yeah. And again, it's fabulous. These are the things you find when you just go and buy like a Harper's from anywhere in the 1860s, 1870s, and you can get them for not very much money from Timothy Hughes or somewhere like that who trades in newspapers. And you find things in them that are just amazing. And the editorials are amazing. In these editorials, there's Twas the Night for Christmas where they politicize it and they say, those damn Yankees have blocked the roads. Santa can't get through. Kids won't get any presents. And then in the South, in the North, they'll sort of say the opposite. It's really interesting editorial stuff. Really great. Oh, I just put this in because it's Winslow Homer again, right? He sort of goes from the early days of Harper's and all of that to this masterpiece. Wow, right? Oh, is there? Oh, wow. So the Golden Age illustration, sort of by the 1880s, you've got color printing coming in, and so you have the Brandywine School and the Drexel Institute in Delaware, and you have these great artists coming along like Jessie Wilcox Smith, who becomes a millionaire. She's on every cover of every single issue of Good Housekeeping magazine for 30 years. Dominated, absolutely dominated. What was interesting about this was the Drexel, half the students had to be women. It was dictated that half the students had to be women. But I always thought that was a good thing. But then I looked into it further, and actually they were really hardcore, and they said that, yes, women need to be in the arts, but they need to be taking it seriously, and they couldn't marry, and they couldn't have kids. So it was like, sure, you can be a professional artist, but you've got to give up all of that, everything else to compete. And I thought, wow. And so she doesn't marry, she doesn't have kids. She's one of these women caught up in that. But she goes on to be this great artist. And she has lots of work in the Newport. There's some museums that have her work, and they're hundreds of thousands of dollars. And she does a wonderful Twas in 1912. Yeah, one of my favorites. Not hard to get because she's so prolific. So, just moving along to Mrs. Claus, I spent the last 2 or 3 years working on Mrs. Claus. She was a character that arrives in the 1850s. She first arrives in the world in 1849 in Philadelphia in a story called The Christmas Legend. And she's in disguise, and she's referred to as the wife of Santa Claus. She arrives at Yale in the Yale Literary Review in 1851, in Connecticut, New Haven, as Mrs. Santa Claus, the first time in the world. So we have Santa Claus from Manhattan, or from James Fenimore Cooper, but Washington Irving, Simon Clarke Moore, definitely New York. And you have Mrs. Claus, I say, from Connecticut, 1851. But what was really interesting is in 1854, she shows up in the first theatrical production in the world. There are no European Mrs. Clauses at this point. She's American. She shows up at the New York Lunatic Asylum in a play. This gentleman, again, this is the important year for America, so I think this is a really important person. Dr. Brigham was the head of the New York State Lunatic Asylum in Utica, and he believed that when you were mentally ill, you needed to have the arts, drama, art, gardening. You needed to have great food, compassion, socialization, all of these things. No chains, no cages, none of that. And so he really revolutionized it. So it's through his efforts that we have the very first play ever written by the patients and performed by the patients of Mrs. Claus. And she shows up with Santa with a baby named Orville. They do a dance and song and everything else. So this is a really important individual, Dr. Brigham. He's also the founder of the American Psychiatric Association and the founder of the American Psychiatric Journal. So, very important person, right? Orville. That's just what they came up with, was baby Orville. So following along Mrs. Claus, Catherine Lee Bates writes a very important poem, Goody Santa Claus on a Sleigh Ride. Catherine Lee Bates, America the Beautiful. Very interesting poem, places her in the suffrage movement and talks about her wanting to be part of the action. There's about 12 stories written by different people that place Mrs. Claus in the suffrage movement between 1870 and 1900. It's about 12 of them I found. And they're not, this is online because she's so famous. This has been recorded on YouTube. But the rest of the stories I found are not online. I had to buy magazines and books and sort and find them. They've been lost for decades. So it was really thrilling to do that and to put them in my new book and for everyone to enjoy not only the text of the poems and stories, but also the art. So that was really great to do. So moving into this, the 20th century, the next big thing for Mrs. Claus is Nat King Cole with Mrs. Santa Claus's Song, which we all still sing. Very influential. So, leaving Mrs. Claus, Currier knives, just, they always, I love looking at them. I find them very sentimental and just wonderful. I'm sure you all enjoy Currier knives. They had a long career and started off 1835 with Nathaniel Currier, and then he joins, James Merritt Ives joins him in 1857, and the company folds in 1907. But there's thousands of these, and again, their most prominent, one of their most prominent artists was a woman, Flora Balmer, and she was one of the first professional women to make a full-time living as an artist in America. And she wasn't allowed to put her name on them for quite some time, but then she finally was, and very, very prolific. Winter pastime? Oh, he entered according to the Act of Congress, 1855. That's from 1855. So. Yes, it would have been copywritten. Yeah, copywritten. But her name's on it. So, yeah, her name's on it. Yeah. This one's in the Springfield Museum. Yeah. So, just moving into some of the literature, this is Mary Maple Dodge. She gave F. Scott Fitzgerald and E.B. White were stars as children, as writers. She used to run a magazine. She was the editor of St. Nicholas magazine. Again, it was in production for decades, and you can go and buy them and get great things in there. But she ran a contest, a writing contest, and she discovered F. Scott Fitzgerald and E.B. White. So pretty amazing. She also published these other individuals who I've listed here. She also wrote Hands on the Silver Skates herself, but amazing individual, really accomplished. Here's her magazine, and the covers are wonderful. It's hard to get some of them, but sometimes you see them on eBay. They're really, really something. So moving into the Christmas cards. So Christmas cards come along 1880, sort of 1920 in America. And this is Ellen Clapsaddle. Ellen Clapsaddle was a woman from Richfield, New York, and she did 3,000 designs. You probably recognize her from Halloween and from Patrick's Day and Washington's birthday and 4th of July. She has lots and lots of images. And she's credited with making, compared to Nass Santa, who was kind of jolly, but she makes him really jolly. And the red cheeks and the smiley, sort of softer Santa. She's well known for doing that. She has a very tragic story. She was very successful. She went to the Cooper Union in New York to study, and she did so well that she had lots of money. She was backed by two people, the Wolf brothers, and they set up shop at the turn of the century in Germany. And she did all these wonderful designs, and everything was going great until First World War came along, and then there was a fire, and everything was destroyed. All of her originals and everything she built in her 50s. And one of the Wolf brothers goes to Germany to collect her, and she's in a bad state. And she comes back and dies in her 60s in Manhattan. But these are highly collectible because there's so many. There's 500 million Clapsaddle cards that went in based on 3,000 designs. So if you go on eBay, there's age of Ellen Clapsaddles. So, and if you have postcard collections, you may even have one. She signs them. Yeah, really interesting story. I've researched it quite a bit. Here's more Ellen Clapsaddles. I just want to touch on some of the more popular people that some of you may read at Christmas. Louisa May Alcott, she is credited with writing the first elf story. She writes in her diary that she's finished the story and that her sister May is going to illustrate it. It's lost. The manuscript was lost. It was never published. So we only know she wrote about this Christmas elves, but we don't have it. This is her sister illustrating the first edition of Little Women. Very valuable thing to own. And I always love this. I think it's great that she had her sister do it. So I don't know if you read this. Another really great thing to read is The Gift of the Magi. Again, with this year sort of coming up for celebration, these are some of the great people that maybe look up and read this Christmas if you're gathering with your family. These are ones I recommend along with Harry Beecher Stowe. This is interesting. The Nutcracker Ballet was first performed in the United States in 1944 by the San Francisco Ballet Company. So many of you, my 4-year-old granddaughter is going to this the first time this year. It's a tradition for many, many families. But it was also translated into English by Helen Keller, I like to mention. I always mention Helen Keller wherever I can. Helen Keller wrote an amazing short story, a letter. It's called An Approach to Christmas. So if you're looking for something to read to your family around the fireplace this Christmas, I would highly recommend you find this. It's easy to get online. She talks about what it was like the first year she knew how to sign and what Christmas was like compared to what it was like before. And it's very moving. She talks about her dog being a dog and before it has been something she stumbled over and the smells and what Christmas meant. And it's just a beautiful piece of writing. So I highly, highly recommend you read Helen Keller. It's a letter. It's an interview where someone says, "Tell us about your first Christmas time you write." It's called An Approach to Christmas. And it's very easy to find online. Yeah. Here she is with this dog, and she ends up in this letter. She puts a red bow on it before, and there's love. before this, she had none of it. And it really brings home the value of language, what it really means to be a human. It's beautiful. And just two more, I think it's good to sort of, if you're looking at things to read this holiday season, these are people, Paul Laurence Dunbar, Christmas Carol, and Angelo, The Amazing Peace, and Henry Van Dyke's Book of Christmas, all favorites. You may like to look those up and read them. I think it's lovely to read aloud at Christmas. When you read Harriet Beecher Stowe's letters to her husband, she talks about sitting on the fire and what they're reading. And so many people, in the past, we have TV and all of these things, we read. And we read to our young children, but I think it's lovely to read out loud to adults as well. So there's such a wealth of literature to choose from. Mark Twain writes about Christmas. All kinds of these people write about Christmas. And I think it'd be kind of fun to sort of, maybe you've got some time now to sort of make a list of things to read, or even just read them for yourself. And maybe you can recommend something for me if you like to read. So, of all the Christmas art, we all have our favorites. I'm a very big fan of N.C. Wyeth. I love the fact that he did it for his commercial work, but also for his fine art. But he got into Christmas like nobody else. He was the kind of artist who would get on the roof as Santa with the jingle bells for, Andrew Wyeth's son, and do the whole thing. And I've been to the museum in the studio, and it's all set up so you could just. This clock is still there. You can walk into the Wyeth's living room, and in Brunywine, and you can experience what it would be like. It's really something. He was a wonderful artist. Really great. Right. Sounds great. Really great. So, yeah, no, thanks a lot. That's great. So Lion Decker, another one of my favorites. Lion Decker was the mentor to Norman Rockwell. And Lion Decker was very prolific, as was N.C. Wyeth, in influencing Christmas because they did a lot of commercial work. So they did a lot of cover magazines, Saturday Evening Post, but all kinds of other magazines as well, and a lot of bank posters and just commercial work that everybody saw. And so this is Mummy Kissing Santa Claus by Lion Decker before the song. Very influential people, these artists, N.C. Wyeth, just like Jessie Wilcox Smith, because they were on the cover of popular periodicals that everybody saw. So Lion Decker's amazing. Yeah, he was the one who did the Arrow Shirt Man. He was Lover, and that whole campaign is Lion Decker is well known for the Arrow Shirt commercials, but very, very talented, and Norman Rockwell very much admired. Norman Rockwell, one of the greats, of course, and very prolific. Saturday Evening Post again, and I was just in Stockbridge, and they reenacted the Christmas Main Street scene. They've done it every year, and sure enough, they did it with the cars and everything. It was great to be there. It was last Sunday. But Saturday Evening Post, again, you can collect them. You can buy them for $15, these things online. And you don't just get the Saturday Evening Post cover, you get the whole magazine, and you find things in there. So I'm a really big fan of buying old magazines to get things. But one thing people don't think I know so much about the Dickens thing with Norman Rockwell is that in the 1930s, Norman Rockwell does a series of Dickens covers for Saturday Evening Post, and it started a real resurgence of interest in Dickens. And I still see Dickens so popular now, and I think that really got it going. too. White Christmas comes out in October 14th of 1954. Again, a classic. We all watched it, I'm sure. It's playing at the Goodspeed in Connecticut right now. Yeah, the live show. So very influential. Again, so Mrs. Claus is in there. And then we come to Schultz, which on December the 9th, a couple of days ago, 2 days ago, celebrated the 60th anniversary of Peanuts. And it, it's been loved by children for generations now, a couple of generations. And I was about 7 when that came out, and it's been one of my favorites for sure. So thank you to Children's Schultz. Yeah, there it is, the 60th anniversary. Hard to imagine, isn't it? 60 years ago. Yeah, one of the greats, right? So we'll just finish up here. This is Andrew Wyeth. Because I love art and I'm a historian, I love Andrew Wyeth. I've always loved him. And I think I was 14 and I asked for a book for my birthday present kind of thing. And I went looking for different artists I love to see what they did for Christmas. Because almost everybody comes to Christmas. So you may have a favorite artist that you can now go and look for and see what they do. So I love Maxwell Parrish, and I really enjoy Andrew Wyeth. And I found this in Christina's World. This is a Christmas stocking in the middle of Christina's World. They just come to Christmas, and I think because the nod to his father, I think there's a connection here, because his father was so over the top in love with Christmas and Santa and the whole thing. But the other one was Maxwell Parrish, who we think of as nymphs and columns and gardens, but Maxwell Parrish did the Knickerbocker St. Nicholas for an edition of the book, and he also did the facades, the drawings for facades of a white marble rendition of Santa Claus for a museum destined for Manhattan. Unfortunately, the man who was collecting all the money to build this great museum absconded with it, so it never was built. But that's Maxwell Parrish. So you can really take anybody and find a way to sort of introduce them into Christmas. It's fascinating how everybody, even Andrew Wyeth, it's called The Open Window, and it's in the Christina's World series. You think of the woman Christina on the field? Yeah. What's the stocking, right? It's just interesting to me that they did that. So these are my books, and I just wanted to mention when I started all of this, I think people often are interested in how I got involved in Christmas in the way I have. So I have this art background and an undergraduate degree in history, and I just really wanted to sort of come together with this. But what really got it going was in 2012. I was working on a tobacco prevention campaign called, it was to get the labels on films so that when you went to a movie, it would say, beware, like we do with nudity or drinking. There was smoking in this film. We were working out of the University of Southern California on that campaign. And I decided to do something with publishing. I thought, well, what else could I do? Because I'm concerned that tobacco industry is still really going after kids. And so I went to the library and I pulled all the books out. There were Smoking Leprechauns, Three Bears, and Goldilocks, and bunnies, and everybody. And then I saw Santa Claus smoking, and I went, of course he smokes. And so I took the pipe out of the poem, and I took out the lines, the stump of a pipe, and the tight teeth, and smoke being served with pipe like a leaf. And I published this book, and it went all over the world. I ended up, Stephen Colbert did a spoof, and then Barbara Walters on The View, and NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams read it as a news story, that I was the woman who got slugs for smoking. And it went all over the world. It went to China, it went to India, it was 200 pages deep on Google, it was ridiculous. And I didn't ever expect that to happen, but it became like #1 on American Poetry on Amazon, and I won 8 book awards, and that's 2012, and it still sells like crazy every year. And I've done it in multiple languages and formats, and it's interesting because you start off sometimes with a little project, and then it just turns into any project of your life. And I'm very proud of it because I truly think children of this century want smoke-free Santa, because we've done a great job of educating them that Santa Claus, that smoking is hazardous for your health. And we interviewed 1,000 children, and they didn't want a smoking Santa. So we thought, well, it's for them. Why would we have them smoking if it concerns them in any way? So I also did it because there are children whose parents do smoke who are worried about smoking, and they write letters to Santa saying, "Can you get them to stop?" And they don't deserve to turn a page and find Santa. So I did that. I had a lot of slack about it. I was called a literary vandal by the American Library Association on NPR of Los Angeles. I got hit in the head by a book and called a heretic. So I've had some slack. It's been interesting, but I stand by it completely. And I think that I see editions out there, and I just glamorize them and sympathize with folks in a really awful way. So when I first decided to do this, I went home and I got out my edition my dad gave me when I was 4, and I was smoking on every single page. It's from the 50s, and I just thought, that was that generation for sure, but now I think kids deserve this. So that's what I did. And then when I did that, I discovered that this poem was turning 200 in 10 years. And so I spent 10 years working on this. And I read, when I say I spent time with Washington Irving, I mean I read everything he wrote. And I studied his entire life as much as I could. And then I moved on to Clement Clarke Moore. And then I moved on to Heritage Stowe. And then I just worked my way through Christmas literature and art in America, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, writing this book. It was wonderful because I found things, I discovered things. Like the letter from George Washington, I gave that to Mount Vernon. They didn't have that. They didn't connect that with the spy. They didn't know that. So when you're a historian, it's fun to do this kind of thing. I also found the oldest copy of Twas The Night for Christmas in the world is in Canada in a museum in the handwriting of Mary Odell, the spy's daughter. So how it got there, we don't really know, but there were things that you could discover that was just so much fun to look at. The same thing happened with Mrs. Claus, because I found things that people haven't seen for 100 years, 150 years. They've just been lost, and I think they're really relevant and great. So that's sort of how it all came about. I don't know where it's all headed, might be it, but that's kind of how it all came together. And this won the Benjamin Franklin History Silver Award. And it was just a total joy. I do have a collection of Twas now, and I have a collection of those too, because you needed to buy the real thing sometimes. I'm not sure what I'm doing with all this stuff now. I have a lot, and I'm sure my children one day will go, "What is this?" Why do you have Clement Clarke Moore's will? Why? But you needed to do the work to get to that level of it. So, yeah, so all very interesting. And, yeah, it was quite the day when I got a phone call. I was walking on the street. Someone called me and said, "Didn't Gilbert did a scoop on you last night?" I went, "What?" And then it went crazy. It was ridiculously crazy for how big that story was. But anyway, and now I just hang out with the Santa Claus community. The New England Santa Society is the biggest in the country. There's 400 members. There's people who do perform as Santa and as Claus throughout the year. But they also do charitable work. They give at the time hospices, children's hospitals, private with sick children, like care, all of these things all year long. And they also support one another in a very big way. So they're an amazing bunch of people, and it's been a delight. I've met 3,000 Santas, and probably 2,000 Mrs. Clauses at 6 conventions around the country. And I really admire them. Next time you bump into a Santa Claus or a Santa Claus, maybe they're thankful to work with you because they do it. And they meet every month. They have monthly meetings with people. And they have their own tailors, and they spend a lot of their own money. Some of them make $100,000 a year. Not everybody. Some of them just do it, and they're such lovely people. Usually in their 70s and 80s, but they're retired, military, retired teachers, medical people, performers, actors. Shakespeare an actor one day I met. You met him too. Shakespeare an actor, he's Santa. Take great pride in their performances and costumes. But yeah, really lovely, lovely people. So those are my books. That's what I do, and I hope that was. And I hope that you do compile a Christmas reading list and go for the short stuff. You're found it so. you know, but just like Henry Van Dyke's poem is short. It is just beautiful. I mentioned Helen Keller's letter, Harry Beecher Stowe's First Christmas in New England. Beautiful, beautiful. Um, so many great, Henry Longfellow, it was great. Probably, they all did. You can't find somebody who didn't. Like Andy Warhol, 1981, the miniseries, you know, Santa Claus in the miniseries. You can't throw a dart and not find something. But it was fun working the Gilbert Stuart thing in his life because I had to go research a bit more about him. And as we mentioned you earlier, we don't know where his body is. We can't find his grave. He died of the properly. He was buried properly, and then they went to find him later to memorial to remember him properly. And they can't find him. Oh, I wrote that down somewhere this morning. Massachusetts somewhere. Yeah, they can't find him. Yeah. Talking. He didn't finish the original. He didn't finish his talking. He made movies of that. Yeah. But we have a Gilbert thing here. No, it's closed. I went to go to it. Yeah. But the William Constable picture I showed you, that is a Gilbert Stuart. He had him commissioned one so well. He commissioned one for himself and for Hamilton. His own portrait of George Washington. But yeah, it's interesting when you read notes about George Washington and the Moors and everybody else, and Hamilton and everybody else. They're all involved, right? But, I had the New York Post called me like, after the ABC news, like when Brian Williams stuff like it was dead serious news. A woman. News story now, like, and then the New York Post called me and said, "How's it going?" They drew the American Library and it's like literary event. An NPR it's not. This poem has been changed, you know, guinea pig version, pirate version. Like I didn't censor anything, right? But
So it's in the domain.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but the New York Post called me up and said, "How's it going?" And I said, "Oh, it's like 8 emails from my office." And it said, "The only wreath I want to see this year is one on June grave." And it was signed the head snowman of the Outback. So the New York Post said, "Can we have it?" And I said, "Oh, it's not. It's me." So they put it on page 4 with a cartoon of Santa sitting in a corner with a bottle going, "McCall's taken away my vices," right? And then that caused a whole, right? So, no, everybody did it. It was ridiculous. But the Library Association thought it was an act of censorship. That you shouldn't cut words out of the most famous poem ever written in the English language. I'm a child's rights activist. Kind of thing when you're talking about little kids, you know, I think you need to look up we did the tobacco master settlement agreement for a reason. Cartoon characters smoking is illegal. Bill Clinton made it illegal to do that. So why do we have Santa? Yes, right. So I'll just quickly add one more little thing here. I had in the last 4 or 5 years, I guess there's been some I've had a few people sort of come at me and say that, you know, it's Christian based and therefore it shouldn't help us. Well, the answer to that is one, he's an elf. He's an elf. An elf, a jolly elf. He has the word Christmas. but he's an elf. And the other thing is, in the 1980s, the Supreme Court got involved because there were schools saying you can't have Santa Claus in the windows, on school, and you can't have Santas in public buildings. So the Supreme Court, Judge Burgess ruled that because it's part of Western culture for centuries, and because it's been part of American culture for centuries, read at the White House, Library of Congress, everything else, it's an overreach. And then he went further. He said, if you have Santa, not a religious symbol, you can have a religious symbol. If you don't have Santa, or a reindeer, or what is called freedom of religious expression, the Establishment Clause, the whole division of state and religion, he said it's a complete overreach to deny Santa. So he actually went further to say, you want to have your manger? You got it. It's great stuff. But I'll ask more questions in a second. This is the funniest story, I think, of my entire 14 years. Washington Irving, Grace Bridge, which is his Christmas story set in this old English manor, has been performed at Yosemite National Park since the days of Anthony Adams in 1930. He performed in it. And I wanted to go there. It's very expensive. It's a big theatrical production. Feast and dinner, and the theatrical, really big. It was like $500 or $600, and the hotel is really expensive too. So it's like a real commitment. So I thought, well, maybe I can get my books in there. I can go in the lobby and get it, because I'm this big Washington Irving fan. So I wrote to the Yosemite Parks people, who are the ones who do the gift shop, and I sent my books in, and then I phoned them up and said, what do you think? And she said, well, we have to go through the protocol. I said, well, what would that be? Well, give me an example. She said, well, there can't be any animals in clothing. What? There can't be any mice in clothing? Like what? Like no Smokey the Bear with a hat? Like, I thought, uh-oh. And I was going, well, my mice are probably in nightgowns, right? And I'm like, she wouldn't let my book in because it has animals in clothing. It would offend the bears in the park.
That's a policy. That's an interesting.
I totally knew my goal completely. I said, so fascinated by what you just did. Tell me more. And I never got my books in the park, and I never got to go to Yosemite and see Washington Irving.
The children's library.
Well, look at all the team sport. But in Yosemite, it's offensive to bears if they see. No, we can't have any animals and clothing in our book in our gift shop because it's offensive to the bears in the park. That was the funniest. That, and the other night when a woman asked me, I said that Mrs. Claus arrived in Philadelphia in 1849, and literally, she arrived, and she asked me if she was still alive. I wasn't sure what to say. I think I said, in your heart. In your heart. I meant she arrived. I didn't mean she arrived.
Yeah.
I meant she arrived on the literary page. Funny. Did you have any other questions? What? Oh, yeah. It comes through all the centuries and cultures. Yeah. Well, Santa Claus comes through all the sort of Sinterklaas, I mean, all the different Dutch, German, everything else. But it's really St. Nicholas. And when 9/11, when they blew up the towers, they also destroyed the and when the shrine was built, beautiful. They have a great big mural of the St. Nicholas legend of the three balls in the mural. But leave it with the Italians because St. Nicholas' relics are in Bari, Italy. They gave St. Nicholas' relic of his right foot to the city of New York for that shrine. So whenever they do communion, they bring out his foot. The shrine. Oh, go, it's great. It's great. But such is the reverence we can make daily chips. Onboard. What? Yes. Yeah, Pawnbrook. Did you see Pawnbrook? We'll have a steak and next door. But, yeah, I've chilled. But, yeah, well, that's me, and I hope you enjoyed it. And, well, it was selling now, right? So that's where it comes from. But there are certainly artists who whatever they want. They can make them personal. Everything's incredible. Poetic license to these characters and but yeah, it's a phenomenal story and it's fun. We spend 2 months of the year, Christmas, really November the 1st onward, or middle of November, bit of January, right? Yeah, right? Right? Or 12th night, bit of the apple. But yeah, very, very important. And I just say that people say that we're cool and we commercialize them, but as I mentioned usually, God, you would say that message that Coca-Cola is the world and one, two, that's 50%. This character represents very kindness and value, right? Generosity, kindness, thoughtfulness, love, non-judgmental, like just the best. So for them to give him this publicity tour around the world was a very, right? I wish they had it done for Mrs. Clarke. They didn't. What they did is they saved that for the 1964 edition of Playboy magazine. And they have Mrs. Claus by Hayden Sandblom, who did all the Coca-Cola commercials. He got him out of retirement at 73 and said, you want to do Mrs. Claus, Coca-Cola, do a special edition of Playboy. That's as close as Coke got to Mrs. Claus, Playboy. Oh, 1934, I think. So that's a good thing, not a negative. Yeah, I think the Playboy makes it. Thank you for coming. I do have books. I have too many books. These are on for 20 and these are on for 5. Yeah. Ah. Thanks for coming.